Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 8th of December 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Mike Robinson, got that right, I think. And behind the technical desk is Nick Green. Well, a variety of comments on the weather. Penzance seems to be a bit grey, cold and blustery. Seems to be pretty good in Swansea. Other places in the country reporting clear skies, blue sky in fact, and sunshine. North of the border, not sure, and I'll apologise to the lady from Dundee because I missed her weather report on Friday. So we'll see whether we can cover north of the border tomorrow. I'm sure there will be some weather in Scotland tomorrow. Well, where are we going to start? I suppose, hot on the heels of Penzance, it better be something to do with the sea. And here's our local Plymouth newspaper with an article which I think many people will read, they will smirk at, and then they will move on. So what is the Plymouth Herald headline? Well, it's female commander of Plymouth warship quits Navy after being removed from post over claims of an affair with her shipmate. So the meat of this story, if we can bring it in, is that this was the lady who made history as being the first woman to have command of a frontline warship in 500 years. But what's happened? Well, the whole thing is turned sour because she had an affair on board, or it's alleged she had an affair on board. But what we do know is that she was removed from the warship and then everything went quiet. Now, a Royal Navy spokesman has said it's not the policy of the Naval Service to make public any individual personal matters. It would be inappropriate to comment. We'd just like to say that's a very interesting comment in itself because this is a very serious incident, certainly for a commanding officer to be removed from a warship. But here's the Royal Navy saying, well, we're not going to tell the public what actually took place. We're not going to say what disciplinary proceedings were taken. And it now emerges that this lady has slowly and quietly slipped out of the Royal Navy, so we're not to be told.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Is there not an admiral named West?
Mr. Alan West.
And is there any relation?
Not that I could find some time ago, but possibly this is the case, I don't know. But the point we're really making here is that a serious incident took place on board a warship. The captain had to leave. This is this lady, Commander West. And now the public is simply to be told, don't you worry about this. It's nothing for you to concern yourself with. She's gone her own way, presumably on a full pension. And the general public, well, just go away and be quiet. This is the state at its worst. And of course, if we don't know what the state of discipline is within Britain's armed forces, then the country once again moving into a very dangerous position. So we're going to say that this article is a lot more serious than it may appear on the surface. And UK Column would certainly like to know what the facts are about that incident on board the ship. Well, we just said court-martial offence swept under the carpet. We'll add it up at the top of the screen there for anybody who wants to take a screenshot. So at the end of the day, number 10.
Yes, number 10.
Control.
Apparently we are in a global race and children have to compete in that global race. And to get the best jobs, we need mathematicians and scientists. That's pure and simple, according to David Cameron. I'm not sure that he is capable of counting, so I'm not sure how he knows that. But anyway, he said that today we commit to delivering more maths and science teachers. This is part of our long-term economic disaster for Britain, making sure our children have the skills they need to thrive and get on. And this was this morning, there was a number of pupils visiting Downing Street for a lesson in how to program computers as part of the International Hour of Code project. And he said, it will take time, but it's absolutely vital for the success of our country that we teach maths and science and computing in the modern way, because that will be one of the things that will determine whether we succeed or not. And so he's spending £67 million over the next 5 years to give extra maths and science training to currently serving teachers and to hire a further 2,500 teachers. But unfortunately, for the last 3 years, the government has failed to manage to reach its targets for hiring any kind of teacher, never mind maths and science teachers.
So education destroyed, basically, through the Labour area.
That's it, and this is really a cynical piece of electioneering, in my opinion, in an attempt to say, well, we're doing it for maths and science teachers now. Never mind the fact that we haven't hired any in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, so a statement from David Our King Cameron, and that's it, that's the policy. Where did the 67 million come from?
This is a good question.
Because austerity measures at the moment, we've got no money for anything.
Indeed.
Apart from war.
Well, you see, what they seem to be doing at the moment is re-announcing already announced things. So I think this is just another one of those re-announcements, or else they're just utterly certain that they're not going to be able to hire these people in any case, so it doesn't really matter what they say.
Okay, well, we can follow that up very nicely with information from Russia today. We're going to call this simply State of the Nation here. And, well, what's in the frame? Well, this isn't IS, it isn't ISIS, it's not Al-Qaeda, and it's not Al-Nusra. We'd just like you to meet the people terrifying the British government. And who are they? Well, they're students simply protesting against tuition fees. So we've got a certain irony here that David Cameron has said, oh, well, my goodness, we haven't got enough science courses going on. Or maths. So what we've got to do is donate 67 million. But a few students get a little bit uppity, quite rightly, because they're complaining about tuition fees, which are only south of the border, of course. And remember that the student loans company is north of the border. And what happens, in pile the police. So this is Warwickshire, where this took place. And if you go to Google and put in student protest Warwickshire, you will see some pretty disturbing film of, once again, thuggish police wading in, threatening to gas and taser students who were simply doing what students have always done, which is protest and occupy buildings to make their protest. So slight irony here that we've got David Cameron saying he's all for education. Most of students finding it very difficult under tuition fees at the moment. But if you're north of the border, not a problem, of course. And probably over to you, Mike, for the police.
Well, the police. This is Sir Peter Fahey, of course, who is Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. And he's saying that Britain could drift towards a police state. Well, let's look at a definition for police state. So here's one. If you just put in police state definition into Google, you get a totalitarian state controlled by a political police force that secretly supervises the citizens' activities. Well, I mean, it may not be a very good definition because, of course, even in the worst totalitarian state, which has a secret, which secretly, it doesn't really secretly supervise, is pretty open, isn't it? They may have a secret police, but that is a police that polices secrets, or not a police that people don't know about, right? So that's not the best definition, but nonetheless, it does seem to more or less apply to Britain. But of course, we should remember, or you may have heard this over the weekend, that the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, and this is the court that oversees Britain's intelligence agencies, and they decided on Friday that the electronic mass surveillance of people's cell phone and online communications, as highlighted by PRISM program and the Snowden's revelations, they have decided that that is legal. So this is the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. It's not a proper court. It's a statutory body set up under the RIPA Act. So, of course, where did the relevant so-called human rights organisations go? They went straight to that body in order to try and get a court ruling on this. And what did they really expect to win it? Just something interesting there before I move on. I noticed that Liberty, which is one of the bodies that took this action, is in brackets on that court document there as still being called the National Council of Civil Liberties, a name they seem to want to get away from, but nonetheless, that seems to be their proper name.
Well, now that one surprises me, Mike, because I thought they had genuinely dropped the NCCL title after all of the information came out of the links through to the paedophile organisations, but clearly that's not the case. What is interesting is that Shami Chakrabarti is, of course, there named on that document. And I think somewhere we've got a film clip, not very good quality, taken at a meeting at which Shami Chakrabarti simply admitted that there was a dictatorship forming, but more or less we'd all have to get used to it. So maybe it's time to see whether we can pull some of that footage out to at least put a bit of text up as what's come out of that lady's mouth.
So anyway, they lost their case on Friday, and they're now going to take that to the European Court of Human Rights, like that's going to do anything. But getting back to Sir Peter Fahy then, if we put this back up, he, as I say, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, he told The Guardian that under the UK's what he called current trajectory, officers might be forced to adopt the role of, quotes, thought police. I think we've seen quite a number of stories recently where this has been the case. But this was the important quote, I thought here. He called for the government and civil society to have a discussion about where the line is between free speech and extremism. So let's just have a look at a definition of civil society: the aggregate of non-governmental organisations and institutions that manifest interests and the will of citizens. So what he is actually calling for here is not a wide public debate. He's actually calling for a discussion between government and the third sector, which assists in creating government policy. The third sector, which pulls in policy from the European Union and the United Nations and pushes it into government. So he's talking about limiting the discussion to those organisations and not a broad public discussion. He went on to say, if these issues are left to securocrats, then there is a danger of a drift to a police state. I'm a securocrat. It's people like me in the security services, people with a narrow responsibility for counter-terrorism. It's better for that to be defined by a wider society and not securocrats. But of course, he's just saying not a wider society. He's talking about a civil society. There is a danger of us being turned into a thought police. This securocrat says we do not want to be in the space of policing thought or police defining what is extremism. So he doesn't want to have to think about what extremism is. He wants that defined for him. But of course, he's quite happy to go and, just like those students, he's quite happy to go and kick the hell out of protesters at fracking protests at Barton Moss, should we say. So he's not too shy about being pretty totalitarian in his interpretation of how large corporations should have their interests protected and peaceful protesters should be treated.
Yeah, interesting to see that side there. That's the non-government organisations, the third sector. Yeah. Tony Blair's The Third Way, and of course David Cameron's Big Society, and that is the mix between this so-called soft sector and the hard front end, for example, the police. But we also wanted to go in. Sorry,
I'm finished there, Mike? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Right, we also wanted to go into the other direction as well, so away from soft big society and into the hard global corporate side. So let's bring in this man again, because he's working in the background. What's he up to? Well, of course, it's Prince of Darkness himself. It's Mr. Mandelson. And we're saying, are Britain's security services watching this man at all? Now, why do we think we need to focus our attention back on Mandy Mandelson? Well, let's have a look at some of the headlines. The one we got on screen at the moment, Peter Mandelson refuses to defend his links to Russian defence firm. And we can come over to this one. Lord Mandelson, Britain could still join the euro. And he says we could still join the euro despite the crisis in the eurozone. And he said it could be attractive to Britain in a few years' time. So what does he know that the rest of Britain doesn't know at the moment? People don't want to go near the EU, disaster area. But here's Lord Mandelson, who was EU Trade Commissioner, of course, and he's saying, well, OK, things might change and Britain could be glad of the euro. Well, let's hop across to this side, and we've got another headline here. Lord Mandelson sees looming nightmare for Russian economy despite gas deal. Now, this is from a few months ago, but let's bring it to the fore again. Lord Mandelson has told Russia's leader in the bluntest terms that their country will be frozen out of the global financial system and face slow economic breakdown unless the Kremlin steps back from confrontation with the West. Well, he goes on, it is the markets that are leading the way, not governments, and they're quickening the pace. This is the looming nightmare for the Russian economy, and it will have to deal and it will have to be dealt with very boldly by the Russian government. To be cut off from global capital markets is not a good idea. So here's Mandelson absolutely ramming home that it's the global markets in control, not the governments. And let's fill in the middle. So under the business, he refuses to defend his links to the Russian defence firm. Lord Mandelson, former Labour business secretary, faces calls to surrender his directorship at Systema, a large Russian conglomerate. The Post is thought to pay around $200,000 a year plus a share of profits. And Systema is linked in with the defence industry in Russia, radar, satellite technology. So this isn't a lightweight company. Anything to do with the military or defence in Russia is going to be intimately connected to the government. Makes sense. So what is Mandy Mandelson up to? Well, let's bring in this headline from the Mail. Putin and the Prince of Darkness revealed the web of links between Peter Mandelson's shadowy global consultancy firm and the billionaire power brokers of Putin's Russia. So let's remember this man Mandelson, he's still in power, he's still making laws, he's still there in politics to decide what's happening in Britain. And yet, what is he up to? Well, this is the meat of the complaint. He's got a consultancy called advisory firm called Global Counsel, and critics point out the Global Counsel's founder and chairman, Mandelson, isn't just a former cabinet minister, he's also a lawmaker sitting in the Lords, engaging in public debates and able to lobby ministers and vote. With this in mind, he's required to declare publicly his interests, but of course this is absolutely not what he's been doing. So if we start to put this picture together, we've got him working now with Global Counsel. We've got him linked in with this Russian defence firm Systema. And if we have a look at the sort of people behind that, we've got Vladimir Yevtushenkov, if I pronounce that correctly, who's a Putin confidant who's supposed to be worth about £7 billion. So what's Mandelson's relationship with him? So that brings us in nicely to the link through to Putin. If we go back to Global Counsel, the only open contacts, it's declaring a BP and Asia Paper and Pulp, or Pulp and Paper, that may be, APP. So why should we be concerned? Well, it took the Mail to dig out that Global Counsel had 366 clients in a secret global network. It identified that 25 of those worked for oligarchs or their friends or directly for the Putin regime. And another 27 were based in Russia or worked for Russia divisions of international companies. And if you think that's getting interesting, well, if you have a look at some of the rest of the names, and we've only got a few here, but we've got people involved with the Russian direct investment. We've got Russian representatives of the European Bank. We've got Rusnano, Russian technical companies. We've got people connected with Gazprom. We've got people connected with aluminium and Oleg Deripaska, steel magnate. And so it goes on. So we've got Mandelson, who is doing what for the British public, linked in with the mass of Russian contacts. So we'll bring you back to that last statement, which will highlight it is the markets that are leading the way, not governments, and they're quickening the pace. So there we are. This man's pretty confident in what he's doing. He's driving a political objective by using influence through immensely wealthy global companies. And despite Cameron's sabre rattling over the dangers of Russia, here's Mandelson clearly in bed with them. So just have a look at Global Counsel for yourselves. Very interesting website because it says more or less nothing, but cartoony sort of diagram there, Mike. You know, it's like many we've seen of organisations that are up to some quasi-political manoeuvring. It seems to be suggesting somebody with a network right the way through political and global company networks. And if you have a look at some of the people, they get more and more interesting because many of these senior people have hopped straight out of British government posts or civil service posts to now be advising and working with Lord Mandelson. And if we take some of the information in a bit more detail, what does Lord Mandelson say about himself? Well, of course, he boasts that he's former European Trade Commissioner, British First Secretary of State. Then he's talking about his portfolio across trade and industry, Northern Ireland business, boasting of working with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And he's been a Member of Parliament and driving the Labour Party campaigns and communication. And a little drop-in bit at the end, he's got Policy Network think tank and chairman of Lazard International. Is that a bank or a hedge fund? I think it's a bank.
It's a bank.
It's a bank. And we just have a look at his number 2 here, Benjamin Wegg-Prosser. Considerable experience in international media and politics. Co-founded SUP Media, a Moscow-based digital media company where he was Director of Corporate Development. But before moving to Russia in 2007, he was Director of Strategic Communications in the Office of the British Prime Minister from 2005 to 2007. As an ex-military person, I find this fascinating that we've got people mixed up in British politics, simply drifting across to work with overseas countries who our own Prime Minister is warning are exceptionally dangerous.
Depends whether you want to initiate a regime change in that country or not.
Yeah. So we'll leave the audience to think about that and have a look and do a bit of research for themselves. But just to be pretty heavy-handed here, think about what we've just run through and have a look at this. So thanks very much for the viewer who sent this in to us. It's come from The Local, France's news in English, and it says that the French homeless are being forced to wear yellow triangles. And the gentleman in the picture's got one on his jumper. This is happening in Marseille. And a few people have already been blasting this idea as Nazi-era tactics to identify the homeless population by issuing them with the ID cards adorned with a yellow triangle. The cards detail their health issues and will be worn visibly. And we couldn't help thinking that it reminded of the yellow stars Jewish people had to wear during the Nazi regime. And so here we are in 2014, and the European Union's true identity is emerging right in front of our eyes.
Not much to say about that, is there?
We'll just take that pause of breath there, I think.
Okay, financial stuff then. Well, the banks are really starting to squeal in this country. Financial Times here pointing out that the Financial Conduct Authority has now issued what they're calling record levels of fines this year. And as I say, the banks are beginning to squeal. They've issued £1.3 billion of penalties since April, according to this article. And that's more than 3 times the £425 million doled out in the full financial year from 2013 2014. And the FT here saying that last year's figure was already an all-time high. Now, £1.1 billion of that money has been assigned to 5 banks as a result of the foreign exchange fraud. And Andrew Bailey, who is the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, said that authorities around the world need to better coordinate their penalties. So he said, then Georgina Philippou, who is a director at the Financial Conduct Authority, Director of Enforcement Strategy, said that this is not a penalties race. We're not competing against other regulators in the world. And what they're really talking about is now sort of having coordinated fines issued. So we believe that we now have enough cases to pause and take stock, and we plan to start a review of our penalty policy in the next financial year. So in other words, the banks can rest assured that next year they'll review the fines that are being doled out for this kind of fraud and corruption. And
what in cases a bit unfair, a bit too
bit too heavy-handed for the banks themselves, you know. But you know, it's not all bad news, because of course a lot of this money is going into the health service, or at least Osborne claims it's going to go into the health service. I'd like to see that accounted for, actually.
And service charities, I think some of them swallowed up a bit of the banking fines, if I remember correctly.
Well, 500 million of banking fines are going to go to military services and related charities.
Yeah, great cynicism there. I think the bankers pay for the wars, and then you drift your fines across in order to help the prosthetics,
yes,
or wherever it's needed.
Yes. So in the meantime then, the Bank of England has issued its latest quarterly bulletin. Well, in a nutshell, what's it saying? It's saying that the UK banking system is going to double in size by 2050. And there's no strong link between banking sector size and probability of a crisis, apparently. So there's the little infographic that they've created showing the size of the banking sector in Britain compared to other European nations. And they're expecting it to, well, it's already 450% of GDP. So if that should go bust, crash, and the size of that is 450% of GDP, how's that bailable out? Is it possible to bail that out?
I don't think it's looking good.
It's not looking good, is it? So they say the size of the UK banking system might roughly double from its current size to over 950% of GDP by 2050, far outstripping the projected increase in other G20 banking systems. It says in the report, some have suggested that the current size of the UK banking system represents a material risk to economic stability, and that action should be taken to reduce its size. So, I mean, what can you say about that? Action should be taken to reduce its size. We could start off with a Glass-Steagall type separation of the banks, and then we don't really care what they do. But at the moment, it is a massive risk. But it's okay, because only 500,000 families would be at risk of falling into mortgage arrears once interest rates start to rise. So that's okay, isn't it? This means that, well, all the positive news in the financial press is saying that means that a majority of mortgage holders could cope if interest rates rose. So that's great. I think that's fantastic. Only 500,000 families in trouble. So they're saying that if interest rates rose from historic low of 0.5% to 2.5%, just 4% of mortgage borrowers would need to take action. And taking action, in their view, means cutting spending or working longer hours. It's a pity there are no jobs for them to work longer hours, isn't it? But anyway, speaking to the Times, Andrew Turry, who is the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, said interest rates have been so low for so long now that some might conclude this is the new normal. They shouldn't. Well, I think that's what we've been saying for about a year. And John Mann piped up as well. He said that middle-class families are likely to have overextended themselves without being able to finance their way out of debt problems. The middle classes are likely to be hit hugely. So that's pretty nasty stuff, really, from the Bank of England's quarterly review. They're basically saying, you know, we're going to grow this bubble to double its current size. It's already a bubble which is
suck in as many people as possible.
Well,
it goes, presumably.
We've said it before, we'll say it again. They intend to asset strip everybody of everything that we own. Property ownership is not something which is of value in a communitarian regime, and I'm afraid that's what we got. Okay, the general election then. Is the coalition, this is quite a good article actually in the Telegraph, is the coalition rift for real? Well, no, it isn't. Of course it isn't. We're already into election mode, and the two parties in the coalition, while behind the scenes they continue to drift in their coalition policies, are pretending to have fallen out with each other. So Nick Clegg didn't turn up to the autumn statement. Danny Alexander making comments about various things related to the autumn statement, saying George Osborne's not a very nice guy. Maybe Danny Alexander has been speaking to him the day before when he didn't seem to be quite all with it, but I don't know. But anyway, this is, of course, is a complete fraud, this whole business of a rift between these two parties, and we'll just watch it with amusement.
Well, amusement until it gets tough. But of course, no debate in Westminster, certainly not if there's anything to do with child abuse. Empty house and nothing of any substance there, unless it's a war. So all the rest of the manoeuvring goes on behind closed doors. But occasionally we get a glimpse, and we'll just have a look at one of the finest politicians Britain has produced, Gordon Brown. Here he is. And note what he's talking about. So Gordon Brown calls for Scottish politics reset. And of course, the BBC happy to promote this, including a video clip. Just remember that aside from being an expert throwing mobile phones, unelected Prime Minister, this man is now the global boss of education. So that should...
Maybe he's calling for maths and science teachers, I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. So what did he have to say? Well, Mr. Brown told the BBC that Scottish politics has got to reset and Labour is going to press the reset button. He said the focus has got to move from the constitution to economic change. It's not now what the Parliament is. The question is what it can do. So I'm not sure I understand any of that, but what we do understand is the fact that, of course, this man is talking about reset, and it is the UK column that has warned, and we will continue to warn, that wherever you see the idea of a reset, particularly if it's mentioning the constitution or the economy, then this is the danger, and this is for the rebuild of our constitution in line principally with the communitarian or European Union model. So Gordon Brown hasn't disappeared, of course, from politics like Mandelson. He's gone underground, elevated to immense power with the European Union sorry, not the European Union, the UN. And what is he up to? Well, if you're going to build a dictatorship, you need a gulag, basically, of psychiatric institutions. And we'd like to just bring this story to the fore. This is not new, but let's have a look at it in context. It's the Scottish Express talking about Lady Hamilton, the Scots widow of wrongly sectioned Duke, calls for a mental health overhaul. And this is a horrible and tragic story of her husband who was sectioned. Lady Hamilton is unable to find out exactly who sectioned him and why, but as a result of being incarcerated for some time, the Duke then died. And this lady is warning at the moment north of the border that something is wrong. Well, we don't think there's anything wrong at all, because this is the state now building a gulag. If you challenge the state in any way, then the aim will be to section you. So we're putting up there a little embedded image of Anne Gregg, who of course was falsely sectioned after reporting the sexual abuse of her daughter Holly. And just so that she's not on her own, we're also going to put up Emma Stoops, the lady who was falsely sectioned in Cornwall after reporting child abuse. So the UK column has reported a number of these incidents. And of course, we already now see the government saying that if you challenge global warming, for example, or you challenge government policy, then you've got to be either an extremist or mentally ill. So this has all been seen before. Stalinist Russia, particularly good at this, locking people up as dissenters, not in prisons, but psychiatric institutes. So on that note, we'll remember Robert Greene. And basically, he's now been under house arrest for 194 days or thereabouts. He's still waiting for his trial in January next year. But let's remember, of course, that it was Alex Salmond's junta of three, including Kenny McCaskill, which made sure that Robert was stitched up. And what happened in court, which we'll just remind people of, was that one sheriff clearly discriminated against him on the basis that he was an Englishman, and this is Scotland. Nice system of justice. Well, what's happened to Kenny McCaskill? Well, he's been thrown out of his main job in Scotland, and where would you want to put such a man? Well, he's actually replaced the Transparency Crusader, Chick Brodie, on Scottish Parliament's Public Petitions Committee. So I encourage you to go and have a look at a diary of injustice in Scotland, and you'll see a scathing article saying, here is this man. He released McGrahy. He was basically, he presided over faked up crime figures, massive handouts of money and legal aid to lawyers, scandals in Scotland's Crown Office. So what do you now do with him? Put him in charge of transparency. Sounds a bit like Francis Maude, really, doesn't it? And we've got to bring in this lady, of course, because Theresa May, master of obfuscation, still no committee chairman for the investigation into child abuse. And we'll give you a reminder that Melanie Shaw, Nottingham child rape victim, is due in court this coming Thursday, that's the 11th, for sentencing. So we can imprison the victims, we can have tremendous effort by the institutions of government to fix up the victims.
Just before we move on, we should maybe suggest that if anybody's going to witness that sentencing as a member of the public, would it be appropriate to wear free Melanie Shaw t-shirts?
Indeed,
yes.
It would. We have free Melanie Shaw t-shirts still available at the UK column. I will be coming up. I will bring some with me if anybody wants to get hold of one of those. But we'll also remind ourselves that Theresa May, of course, under pressure, because many victims are now saying this is just a waste of time and we don't want to be involved.
I have to say, she's looking like she's under pressure as well, doesn't she?
I think she is, but of course she's another puppet, isn't it? This isn't the lady making policy, this is the lady doing as she's told. Is she blackmailed, possibly? Pressurised, certainly. And what sort of stuff can they pressurise the British political establishment with? Well, the Daily Telegraph, very interesting article going back to the Jeremy Thorpe scandal. And what they're saying is that a gentleman called Dennis Mayhem has come forward, who's now giving more detail about the whole of the Jeremy Thorpe scandal, and saying that the order for what happened actually came from someone high up in the Liberal Party. So more of the same, utter filth and corruption in Britain's political parties, the people supposedly running the country.
But it's only coming out once people have passed away.
Well, indeed, yeah. Although, is it John Mann or Dan Zucker? Somebody at the moment is actually calling for the Whips files to be opened on the basis that obviously the party whips hold all the dirt on what's been going on with politicians. So we'll wait to see whether that happens.
Well, of course, this inquiry never seems to get started, but in fact we've decided that we're not going to wait. So on the 20th of February and the 1st of March, the UK column and the BCG is holding a conference, and a large part of that conference is going to be a grand jury entitled "The Institutions of the State That Should Be Protecting Children Were Not Doing So." The aim of this really is fourfold. First of all, to draw attention to the fact that grand juries are still a valid vehicle for determining whether or not there is a case to answer. And remember, that's the point here. Is there a case to answer? We're not there to decide whether somebody has committed an offence or not. We're there to decide whether there is a case to answer. Second of all, to present to the public evidence that institutions and individuals working within those institutions have not only failed to protect children, but in some cases have been involved in the abuse of children themselves. And you know, this is saying this title here is saying that protecting children were not doing so. It could equally say are not doing so, because of course it's still going on. The third point here is to build some momentum for a series of private prosecutions which are being worked on at the moment. The charges being misconduct in public office for any individual deemed to have a case to answer. And the fourth point here is that everyone attending the conference will have made available the evidence presented in DVD form to be handed out at every hustings meeting in the run-up to the general election. So the aim here is to intervene in the election process, whereby not only will politicians be forced to stand up and take a stand on this, but they'll be forced to go to their party leaderships and demand that action be taken on the issue at a national level, because otherwise these individuals are going to lose their seats. And we want to not only encourage you to come to this conference, but to encourage you to get involved in that process. So details will be on the British Constitution Group website and on the UK Column website over the next week or so. But we wanted to announce that today, and let's get some momentum behind this. The British government is absolutely dragging their heels. They do not want this issue to come out before the general election. We've got to make sure that it does.
And we can also say that Bill Maloney still doing fantastic work on the exposure of the child abuse around the Westminster paedophile ring. And we'd also like to thank the police men and women who are, I think actually some of them putting their lives on the line by now starting to speak out against their own senior colleagues who they know have been covering up the abuse of children and indeed the murder of children over many years. So there's some quite interesting things starting to happen in the background, but it does take courage for these people to speak out. And we can say well done to those people in the Metropolitan Police who've been brave enough to say, right, no more. We are going to start telling the truth about the cover-up by senior police officers of the abuse of children. So some good news, really.
Yes. Okay. Ian Crane is back in the country, and so we do have live programmes tonight. So at 7:30, as usual, we've got the Crane Report, and at 9 p.m. we've got Fracking Nightmare, and we've got a little trailer for that to show just before we go.
Okay. Is Ian back with the Suntown or not?
I don't know yet. I hope so.
Right. Okay. We'll wait to see in due course. Okay. Well, thanks very much for joining us. We will be back. Well, same time tomorrow, 1 o'clock. In fact, that will be it will be myself and Louise. And if anybody can get to that hearing for Melanie Shaw in Nottingham, that's in the morning on Thursday, the 11th of December. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This coming Monday, on a special edition of Fracking Nightmare, I'll not only be giving an update from my recent visit to the gas fields of southern Queensland, we'll also be exposing the outrageously excessive, unlawful behaviour of Humberside police, as this country rushes headlong towards the corporatist police state, and the British government pushes this country into a fracking nightmare. The people of the UK need to see the evidence and judge for themselves. Join me on Monday evening on www.ukcolumn.org/live or www.frackingnightmare.com for fracking revelations which need to be exposed now.